Good morning, Gertens gardeners. It's Karen joining you again from the South Tropical lot here at Gertens on a very warm July morning here in Minnesota. Welcome, everybody. We're going to be celebrating the beginning of the Minneapolis Aquatennial today. Hello, shout out to all of my Aquatennial celebrants and participants out there in Minneapolis today. Hi, everybody. We hope you're going to have a fantastic festival. And we wanted to kind of get in on the fun and talk a little bit about do-it-yourself water features here at Gertens today. So, as many of you who have been following along with our video series know, we have a big selection of different kinds of water feature and water gardening products here at Gertens. In addition to all of our water gardening and pond supplies up on our north lot, here on the south lot we have a bunch of pre-made fountains that we featured back in June. And we also have a selection of do-it-yourself fountains. So for those of you who are a little bit more handy or perhaps just a little bit more adventurous and want to kind of tailor a fountain to your own personal aesthetic, to your own specifications, you can kind of let your imagination expand and wander. And as you look at our fantastic container selection out here at Gertens, you can kind of choose your own containers to make your own DIY fountains, as we've done right here behind me. And today, a little bit later in the presentation, after taking a few of your questions, we are going to actually be putting together one of these fountains so that you guys can see how we do it. And then you can go home and do it yourself. So let's get started with some of our basic questions, and we'll talk a little bit about DIY fountains.
Yeah, so starting out, just a basic supplies. What would you recommend for supplies for starting out?
So if you are trying to do a DIY fountain for the first time, let's talk a little bit about the supplies you need. And I have some of those supplies put out here on my little plant stand. So the very first thing you're going to need is you're going to have to choose your container. And basically any water holding container will do. We have a selection of glazed clay as well as cement containers here on display, so you can kind of see some of the things that we've chosen to make fountains out of. But basically, if it will hold water for you, it's going to work as a DIY fountain. So you can use plastic. If you have a really nice wooden whiskey barrel that holds water really well, you can use that. Plenty of people will do that, or they'll put a liner inside of something. So once you've chosen your container, you're going to go ahead and you're going to pick up a few supplies. Now, some of these we have here at Gertens, and some of them you're probably going to have to run to your local hardware store for. So what we have is we have a water pump right there. And so this is actually what's circulating the water through your fountain up to the top and then back down into the basin. We have a couple of different options for flexible tubing here. So we have clear vinyl, and we also have black PVC flex tubing. Now this one is my particular favorite. It doesn't kink in the heat and it holds its shape really well. So on days like today when it's going to get to 92, this tubing is going to hold its shape really nicely. It's not going to get kinked. You can see that it's actually pretty flexible there. And it just carries the water really nicely. But you can also use clear vinyl tubing, which is a little bit more traditional of a choice, and that's what most of our fountain manufacturers are still running their fountains through. And then we have some pond kits. So if you want to kind of simplify your life and have a do-it-yourself all-in-one, you can pick up one of these Pond Master submersible pump and fountain head kits, which has pretty much everything you need to make a real basic container fountain. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute here. I have an LED plume light for those of you who like lighting in your water feature. This is a real basic plug-in LED that you can put up on top of your flex tubing here. So this part goes right in here like that. Pretty cool. We have pot toes. So most of the time when you're doing a DIY fountain, you'll notice there isn't really room for the electrical at the bottom of your container, right? Because the container is meant to sit flat on the ground. So what you need to do so that you don't end up pinching off your electrical and causing electrical shortages and taking all of the insulating rubber off of your wires is you actually use pot toes to lift up your fountain and allow that cord to come out of the bottom. We have plumber's putty, which is a really awesome tool for solving any leaking issues. So you'll notice when you put together containers, sometimes you'll have seeping out of the plug, or the tubing won't fit quite exactly. So you can use plumber's putty. I recommend plumber's putty and not silicone. very specifically because this is great at plugging holes. Silicone is really wonderful for directing water and for sticking two things together that need to stay underwater, but it doesn't make a good plug. So make sure to pick up some plumber's putty. You don't need as big of a roll as I've got here. This one, as you can tell, has had much love out here on the fountain lot. But it is a fantastic, fantastic tool in your toolkit. And then we have rubber plugs. So as you know, you got to keep the water in the container. You've got to have a way to run your electrical out the bottom while keeping the water in. So you use one of these rubber plugs, and they actually have these really neat holes drilled through and then sliced in where you can actually run your cord, and in this case also a light cord. So if I were to do this one, what I would do is I would put my light cord through the tiny hole here, like this in the channel, and you can just kind of line it up with your channel there. And then you take your power cord and you line that one up with the big channel, like that. And then you've got a totally waterproof way to run electrical through your container, which is really, really awesome. So these guys are specifically meant for fountain use. And you can get these at specialty hardware stores. You can get them often online. So this is probably the one thing that you're going to have to do a little bit of pre-shopping for, is to get these rubber plugs. Okay, and then of course the decoration after you're done, right? So once you've run all of your plumbing, you may need to cover up some of your tubing. You may want to fancy or gussy the container up a little bit. So think about how to top off your fountain. In this case, I've chosen some alabaster chips. They go pretty nicely with just about any kind of design of fountain, but we really like these. They're beautiful underwater, really, really pretty. So this is kind of the basic setup that you need to have to start. So your container and your basic supplies, and then you have different options on how that you can start building your water features. So here we have probably our most basic container fountain. We have a concrete basket planter, and we sell this planter right here at Gertens. And we have put a one of our Pond Master kits in there, and it is basically created a tiny little fountainhead. So we have the pump sitting in the bottom of the container, we have the electrical running through that rubber plug on the inside, and then the fountainhead comes up out of the water and creates that lovely little burbling fountain there, which is just adorable. It's such an easy way to get your favorite container turned into a water garden. And you could, if you wanted to, you could put a few little water plants in there. You could run a little light. I don't have a light on this particular one, but I do on my other DIY fountain that's in our blue bell jar there. So you have a lot of options once you've chosen your container. Let's go for some more questions.
Yeah, so speaking more on setting it up, you talked a little bit about electricity. What's the safest way to make it watertight, make it water safe?
Right, so as you can see, we have all of our fountains plugged into GFCI outlets here. And these guys are actually on a separate breaker box that is GFCI. But you want to make sure that when you plug your fountains in at home, you have that little GFCI breaker that can turn it off if it gets a short, if water gets in there. And then you want to do what we call a drip loop. So a drip loop is where the cord that is running to the fountain is going to drip the water away from the inside of the box, right? So you always want to make sure that the water, now it's not as much of a problem with these short guys because the water source is actually below the outlet, it's away from the outlet, so it's not going to drip down like it would in a rainfall. But for something like this guy, where the water is up high, you want to make sure that it's sighted away a little bit at least from your outlet. You want to make sure that you've got a drip loop in your cord so that the water, you can see if it travels down that cord back there, it's just going to kind of sit on the ground. It's not going to go anywhere near the outlet. So you want to make sure that your water has a safe place to go if it overfills or if it gets onto the cord. And that way you're not worrying about the water traveling the length of the cord into your outlet.
And then more on electricity, would you recommend burying the electrical component?
Most of the time with something like this, it kind of depends on where and how close your electrical is. So in a small application like this where your electrical's really, really close, it's not necessary to bury it. However, if you've got, electrical that's going 20, 25, 30 feet away for a water feature that's way over there in the other part of your yard, and there's animals and there's children and there's wild animals. Rabbits love to chew cords for some reason. I don't know why. Squirrels too. It's a good idea to probably bury it from the length between where your water feature is and approaching your outlet, just to protect those cords from little people and little animals getting into them and chewing on them or doing something inappropriate with that electrical.
Awesome. So looking at these ones, we have the different sizes, so there's many different sizes. Do you have any recommendations about what size pump to get for your container?
Right, so when you are looking at choosing the appropriate size pump to run your water feature, you want to think about what we call lift. And lift is how far the pump has to push the water to get from the bottom of the basin where the pump inlet is to the top of the water feature. So with a little basket planter like here, the lift is probably only about 6 inches. On this big guy right here, the lift is probably more like 36 inches. So this actually is a much more powerful pump than what's sitting down in here. And in order to figure out what pump is appropriate for the lift that you're looking for, you can look at what we call a lift chart. So this Pondmaster Eco here has a lift chart, and it's telling you what size. So here's your model here. This is telling you the maximum gallon per hour, and this, it's important to remember, guys, when you're looking at the maximum, this is for no lift. So it's not 160 gallons per hour at 4 feet. This is actually 160 gallons per hour at 0 feet. So this is the maximum amount of height that this particular gallon per hour pump can push up. And now we're looking at the 225. I have the 225 gallon per hour pump here in my hand. So this pump can push a maximum of 6 feet. So if you've got a water feature that would be taller than 6 feet, it's not actually going to make it all the way up if you have an undersized pump. So I actually have a 225 in this one. You can see it's working at about 3 feet, and it's got a nice steady flow, but it's not fast, right? It's not going really burbly and bubbly. It's just a very gentle trickle at that height. So the higher up you go, the less water pressure you're going to have at the top of your feature. So you make sure to check your lift charts so that you know that you've got a strong enough pump for the job. Okay, so we're going to take a look at another one of our DIY fountains here. This is another one that is utilizing our Pondmaster Eco. We've got a little bit of lighting here, and this is our bell jar planter with a bell fountain head. So I love the mirroring of the shape here. We've got the shape of the fountain head that kind of echoes the shape of the jar. We've got really nice sound. We'll give you a second to listen to that. That's gorgeous. I love that sound. It's kind of an echoey dribble. We've got a little bit of light, which you can see this morning. It makes it really, really pop at night. And this is super easy. So we've just got the container itself. We have a plug on the inside. We have one terracotta pot, which you can kind of see through there, which is just holding up that pump so it gets it a little bit higher. So it's just sitting right at the top of the container there so that you can see the bell really nicely. And this probably took us, not counting the time that it took us to get all of the plugs correct, probably took me about 10 minutes to set up. So it was really, really fast setup on this particular one. The only thing that we struggled with a little bit was trying to drill open the drainage hole a little bit. So that's something that you also want to think about when you're choosing a container, right? So with concrete or with glazed clay, a lot of times these planters will have drainage holes, but the drainage hole may not be big enough to accommodate running the electrical plug through. So if you think about the width of an electrical plug, it's actually quite large, and you have to be able to get that electrical plug from the inside of the container out the bottom to run that electrical through. In some cases you can't. So in some cases I actually, on this one, when you're viewing it from the front, you don't even see the electrical cord, but I've actually flipped it over the edge of the bottom planter, which is serving as the basin, rather than trying to figure out how to run the electric through too small of a hole. So there are such things as concrete drill bits. You could drill your concrete planter with a drill bit to make that hole wider, which is actually what we did here with this one. We actually drilled the drainage hole a little bit wider with a drill bit, and that then accommodated our plug. So this one is a very similar kind of setup here. This is a little bit more complicated, and we'll talk through the process of setting up a multi-tier DIY fountain here in a second so you guys can all see how we go from the beginning to the end of making this. But this is a 3-tier stacking pot, and I've chosen these 3A because I like the appearance, but you can see all this beautiful texture just runs right over the side of, the water just runs right over the side of this, and it kind of plays with all of this texture here. So you have great sound, you have all of this water play on this beautiful texturing, and we have 3 pots of lessening size as it goes up, which really makes for a nice presentation. It makes it really fun and playful looking, and it gives you just a really pretty water feature. The more tiers you do, the more likely you are to run into stumbling blocks. However, this one took a long time. We had a lot of struggles trying to get it to behave itself, and you have some trouble sometimes trying to make sure that everything is level on something like this, because you really want, in order to get that even water flow all the way around the fountain, you really want your fountain pieces to be level, both sitting on the ground as well as inside each other. So we had to take some time to really level out the inside pots that are holding up the feature. We had to make sure that the pot itself was level, and then trying to get everything to balance off exactly where we need it to be. So something like this is probably going to take you most of a day.
What did you use to level that?
So let's talk a little bit about plastic shims here. This is DIY fountain maker's best friend. This is just a simple plastic shim. It's used in a lot of construction and woodworking applications, and it works great in water features as well. So what you'll do if you're trying to make something more level is you'll take and apply a shim. Now you can see I've got pot toes under this one, so it's actually held up there, but if I needed to level this, I could actually place this level under a specific pot toe, like this one right here, and that would actually push this whole jar up a little bit to get it more level if I needed it to go, in this case, back towards the west side. So the shims are used, you can use them inside your water feature, you can use them outside your water feature to lift up and boost up one side if it's not exactly perfectly level.
So once we get our pot all set up, when can we start running water through it? Is it immediate?
Almost immediately. So if you find that you do have to use some of your plumber's putty to keep your fountain watertight, you probably want to give the putty maybe 10 to 15 minutes to set up in a warm sunny day, just to make sure that it's tacky and sticky and it's doing its job. If you've already test run something in the water, you'll notice that particularly with wet clay, so wet glazed clay pots, the plumber's putty is not going to be tacky on the bottom of that pot until the pot is dry. So if you've test run and you notice you've got some leaks, and that's not unusual, okay, don't panic if you see some seeping out of one side, or something's not coming up the right way, or the plug itself is leaking through, you can drain everything out, let it dry. You know, applying a towel to kind of pat some of that water out helps to let your clay dry all the way. Then apply your plumber's putty, give it about 10 minutes to set up, and then try your water again and see where you're at with your water tightness.
And on the topic of water, would you recommend running them 24/7 or?
It really depends on where you've placed your fountain and what type of water feature it is. So for something like our bell jar here, a lot of the enjoyment comes out of the light in the evening. You can certainly run it 24/7 if you want, because even if the wind pushes this, the bell is so wide, it's just going to pop it right back into the basin. The likelihood of this water spilling over the side and into your yard or onto your patio is pretty low, but you don't have to if you don't want to. Something like this guy we found, because you are actually filling 2 containers, you're filling the basin as well as your tall planter here with water. If you turn this guy off, he's actually going to drain all the water from here to here out, and that's going to spill out over the basin. So we actually do leave this guy on 24/7 so that he doesn't overfill. But of course you can turn him off. You just want to remember that once you've done that, you're going to have to take your bucket or your hose and you're going to have to refill him as you're starting it back up again.
So we have a question from one of our watchers, David. He says, great job. And he also asks if we need to use Algaecide.
Good morning, David. You definitely will want to use an Algaecide, just like with your fountains, if you are placing any of these DIY water features in a sunny location. So for folks who just want something on their tabletop if it's under an umbrella, if it's under an awning or a pergola, or on the shady side of your yard, you're probably not going to have to use algaecide. But most people like to place their fountains out on the patio or out on the deck where they can hear and see them, and that's probably going to be in some sunshine. So if you do have a sunny location where you're placing your water feature, be it a pre-made fountain or a DIY fountain, you're going to want to make sure that you have algaecide as well as fountain cleaner to kind of clean up some of that summer yuck.
Another viewer asked, Tiffany asks, what or how do you get them ready for winter?
Well, good morning, Tiffany. That is a fantastic question. So whether, again, it's a DIY fountain like I have here, or whether it is a pre-made fountain, there are some steps that you do have to take to kind of protect your water feature from the severe cold and the freezing and thawing, which is actually really the problem that we have with any of these water features, is our freeze-thaw cycles both in October, November, as well as March, April. So what you want to do is you want to drain out your fountain. You want to probably towel it dry, and then if it's a smaller water feature like something like this, you can actually bring it inside into the garage over the winter. You can take all of your plumbing and your electrical, throw it in the basement or in some place that's, you know, above 50 degrees or so, and then just let that sit over the winter. Now if you have something larger, maybe you've built something like this and it's a lot of heavy concrete, and you're not probably going to want to move all of that heavy concrete into the garage, and I can't say I blame you. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to drain this all out. You're going to towel dry it so it's nice and dry, and come about mid-October, before the freeze thaw really starts, you're going to put a tarp or a fountain cover all the way over this water feature. You're going to tie it nice and tight to keep all the snow and the rain and the sleet and the yuck off of your water feature, so that as we enter that freeze-thaw cycle, there are no water crystals getting into the cement, expanding and causing cracking. So that is really our concern with the containers themselves, is to prevent that freeze-thaw cycle. With the electric, we do not want to expose our water pumps to freezing temperatures, so we want to get those guys in before it's 32 degrees outside.
Do you need to take the pump out of that?
Ideally, you would try to take the pump out of this just to protect the electrical. If you leave it out, it will probably go for a couple years, but you'll find that the pumps wear better if they're not left out for the winter.
Kind of related to that, is there like a life expectancy for fountains, or is there a way you can...
Yeah, so if you want to prolong a fountain, particularly something made from concrete, you're going to want to use a concrete sealer. So this is a raw concrete fountain. The little basket that we were looking at earlier actually has a finish on it, so it's already been sealed. But raw concrete like this has not been sealed. So what I would do is, when I got this home, before I actually started filling it with water, I would put a concrete sealer on it. And the concrete sealer is going to keep the water from seeping into the concrete itself. It will help to protect it during those cooler temperatures, and it will make the concrete last longer. So this is a technique that's applicable to any of our concrete, whether it's a water feature, fountains, statues, planters, any kind of raw concrete. You always want to put on a sealer, and do that once every 3 years or so. And then if you're following good care practices, like bringing your electrical in over the winter, if you're drying it off and either putting it in the garage or putting your tarp over it, you should get easily a couple of decades of pleasure out of them.
And with that, would you recommend cleaning it? Would you have like a clean cycle? Or?
Yeah, so most fountain manufacturers recommend once a month cleaning, and I follow that practice with pretty much all of our fountains out here as well. So once a month, you're going to want to go into, whether it again is one of our pre-made fountains, care practices are the same, or DIY, you're going to take the water out, let it drain out. You're going to give it a good scrub with our fountain cleaner. So we have a wonderful fountain cleaner product by Microbe Lift that you just kind of spray it on, use a gentle sponge technique, or maybe we like to use a plastic scrub brush here to get some of the staining off. Give it a good scrubbing. Get all of the little seeds and flotsam and jetsam that'll land in your fountain over the summer out, and then you put your plug back in, you fill it back up with water, and you're ready to go again. Make sure when you're doing your fountain maintenance, you don't forget about your pump. So pumps, the main reason that people run into problems with pumps is that they get mucked up and clogged in their intake valves. So you're going to want to make sure your intake valve, if you look on this fountain right here, so you've got water coming in right through these little fins here, as well as here as well. So all of this can actually be taken apart, and you can clean it with high pressure from your garden hose or maybe a little scrub brush, get all the yucky stuff out of it, and then you'll be ready to go for another month of use. Okay, well, Gertens gardeners, I think it's time to start looking at how we build a DIY fountain. So I'm going to bring in one of my staff members, Brad. Brad is going to be my silent assistant here today. Make sure when you are building anything, when you're working with something that's hot, when you're working with electrical, when you're working with heavy products, and most of these containers are heavy, you bring a buddy. So Brad is here to keep me safe. He's here to help make sure that I don't put anything on my feet or smush my fingers. So always make sure you've got a building buddy when you're building DIY water features. Somebody else to make sure you're not electrocuting yourself or smashing digits. So we're going to go over here to the corner, and we're going to take a look at a 2-box glazed fountain setup. So what we have here is 2 matching glazed pots. We've got a square that fits into a taller rectangle here, and you can see these have this beautiful kind of chevron markings on them, which makes the water flow just beautiful, absolutely gorgeous when it's in use here. And so what you want to do is you've picked your 2 pots in this case, because we're doing a tier. We have checked our bottom hole to make sure that it's going to hold to get our electrical through. We've run our electrical through the bottom. So there you can see there's the plug, and you can see I've actually put some plumber's putty. There's my plumber's putty right there, that little gray stuff. And that helps to keep the plug watertight because, again, these containers are meant for drainage, right? They're not meant to be used as water features, so we have to kind of accommodate that plug a little bit. And the plumber's putty helps to make sure that the plug stays watertight in what isn't an exactly perfectly drilled hole specifically for water features. So we've got our plumber's putty in. Brad, will you tilt this a little bit? You bet. So you can see down here on the bottom, we've run our electrical through the drainage hole. You can see a little bit of plumber's putty out on the bottom there too, just to kind of keep it safe. We don't want that electrical getting pinched. And here's our pot toes so that our pot stays up and it does not pinch off that electrical. So we're going to tilt our pot back down on our pot toes here, and you kind of have to watch what you're doing. We got that one back there. Okay, so now that we've got our electrical run through our box, we've got our pot toes supporting the bottom on a nice even flat surface. We've placed our pump, and I'll show you guys here. Most of these larger size water pumps actually have a screw-in adapter for these hoses. So depending on what size hose you're using, this is a 1/2 inch inner diameter vinyl tubing. So we're using clear vinyl tubing here. There's your adapter. It's actually sitting inside the tubing there. And this just screws into my water pump right there to attach the hose to the water pump so the water pump can run water up through my water feature. So we're going to make sure that's nice and tight. My hose is on there really good. And we're going to just kind of try to place that more in the middle, really. The more middle it is, it's not going to be easy to put it right on top of that plug, so you're going to kind of want to place it next to the plug some way. And then this is going to be run up through the middle of our water feature here. We got it? Okay. All right, so now here is pot number 2. And what we've done with pot number 2 is we have taken some plumbing. And you can see I've got plumber's putty again. Plumber's putty is your best friend, you guys, when you're working on these things. I've taken a PVC pipe to kind of support the inner tubing of the water feature. And that is connected to the bottom. I've run, this is now 1 inch in inner diameter flex tubing up through this PVC, and this is going to house our smaller 1/2 inch vinyl tubing, which we're going to run right up into the middle. So this is kind of going to hold the top. This is going to give us a nice little bubbling effect, and it'll be a little bit more exciting than just kind of what you've got here, which is there's no tubing in the middle, so you just get this beautiful kind of very zen-like overflow. With this one, you're going to have a little bit more action, a little bit more bubbling. It's going to be a little bit more fun. So it kind of depends, again, think about what the aesthetic is that you want to create with your water feature. How much water play do you want? The more water play, the higher the tubing needs to go up into the top of your feature. So now we've got to figure out how we can get this to stay there, because it's not going to be supported by air, right? We got to have something underneath this pot to make sure that it stays in place. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a couple of terracotta pots and we are going to put them in the bottom of our big basin here. And we're going to run the tubing right through. Now this is another reason why it's good to have a buddy, because once you get that tube in there, you got to find it with your finger while your friend lowers the tube. All right.
I'll get the screwdriver.
Definitely.
Yes. So it's one of those things that you really, again, you want to have a buddy, and you want to have your toolbox with you because it can make it a lot easier. So you can see Brad's going to put a screwdriver through, and then he's going to put a screwdriver through the tubing. And that makes it easier to thread that tube up through our support pots here. So there we go. Much easier than me trying to do it with my finger, right? So now we have our tubing up through the center. We have it trapped by our support pots, and our support pots are going to hold our smaller pot. So what I'm going to do is, okay, we're going to, again, you can see why this is at least two-person job. Okay. We're going to thread that tube right on through, and we're going to put our pot right on top of the support terracotta that we have.
Get the rocks and center that.
Yeah. Okay. So now what we have is a really nice double-stacked pot. However, the inside of it doesn't look so great, right? It's going to give you some great water action, but nobody really wants to look at black and white PVC piping. So what we're going to do is we're going to add some decorative rock on the inside, and the decorative rock fulfills two purposes. Okay, so it's going to keep our plumbing kind of centered and nice and still in there. You want to make sure you're not accidentally getting rocks inside your tubing, so that's why I put a finger in the plug over there on the side. Okay, all right. So then we've got most of the PVC covered up with our base fill rock. Now we're going to grab some of our alabaster chip to do the rest of the job. So this is the fancy part here. And again, make sure you've got somebody making sure no rock gets into your tubing there. You do not want to block up your tubing with rocks.
And then just wash your rock before you use it, otherwise the water is dirty.
Yeah. Depending on which rock you use, now our alabaster chips have pretty much been pre-washed by the manufacturer, but most rock that you buy will not be pre-washed. So you're going to want to give it a nice good scrub. I usually take a colander, fill it with my rock, and just a simple hose, and just kind of toss the colander as you're bathing off the rock, and that'll get all the dust and the debris off of your rock. So now we have a really nice presentation here. The only thing you can see is just a little bit of that black piping, and that it's upright at surface level so that you'll have really nice water play. Now's the fun part. AJ was wondering, well, how fast can you fill it? Well, AJ, the answer is right now. We're going to fill it up right now. So we're going to go get some water, and we're going to put that in the basin, and we're going to turn it on and see how we've done. So this is kind of the exciting part. Now, sometimes it'll go together really easy, right? And this took us maybe 10 minutes of building. And sometimes it's not so easy. So we'll see how we've done. We may have some tweaks that we have to make, but hopefully we're watertight now. I know we are at the bottom. and it'll just go over the side the way that we want it to, and we'll be good to go here.
Do you fill that to the top?
You can fill it as high at least as, you can kind of fill it up as much as you want to, but you want some water noise, so we probably won't go all the way to the top. The longer the water has to drip down, the more noise you get. So you want to make sure that at least your pump is covered, but you still want some drops so that you can have some of that wonderful water noise. So the longer the drop, the more noise you get out of your fountain. And of course, because this is a box, you're going to get some really great acoustic echoing out of your fountain when it gets plugged in here. And let us take a peek. I'm going to unplug one of my fountains here, and we're going to just take a peek and see how we did. Oh boy, this is the exciting part. Okay, there we go! Isn't that wonderful? So it's going to take a little bit, because what's happening right now is the water is pushing up through the pump into the tubing here, and then it's filling up the side. So you can see a little bit of that rock dust that Brad was talking about just coming off of the alabaster there. And can you guys hear that? There's that wonderful water sound that we were hoping to get. Okay, so then what you can do is some minor adjustments as far as where your box is to make sure that you've got kind of an even amount of space on each side, and that you're nice and lined up, because of course boxes should be square, right? There we go. One DIY fountain from start to finish. Pretty straightforward process. And again, as long as you can get your electrical through your basin where your water pump is going to sit, you can choose any watertight container that you want. So we have a huge range of containers here at Gertens for you to choose from. I'd love to invite you to take a look and see what you can do out of your own imagination. And then of course, if you have questions, feel free to find me, find Brad, or any of our pottery staff out here. And we're going to be delighted to help you through this process. Let's take a few more questions from our viewers.
One thing that people were wondering is about wildlife. So about attracting wildlife and also mosquitoes.
Okay, yeah. So mosquitoes are something to think about. Obviously, this is Minnesota. We have a lot of mosquitoes, right? So if you have a sitting flat water where the water itself is not moving, like this container at rest right now. So there's no moving water in that. This is mosquito bait. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to turn off your water feature for days and days and days and days, because then you're going to get mosquito mothers laying mosquito eggs in your water feature. So the most important part of keeping your water feature mosquito free is actually having moving water. Mosquitoes will not lay eggs in moving water, only in stagnant water. So just make sure that you keep your water feature turned on pretty much at least 12 hours a day to keep that water moving and flowing through your water feature. Now, if you do happen to notice mosquito larva growth, we do have mosquito bits, which are totally safe for water features. They are just little brown granules that you can put right in your water. They break down and they release a bacteria that will kill any mosquitoes. So you can just put a few little mosquito bits right into your water container. They'll drop down to the bottom and they will kill off any mosquito larvae that you might happen to have. But if you're running your water features every day, that probably will not be a problem. As far as cleaning, was that the other question?
Yep, yeah,
Cleaning. So we've already kind of talked about using our fountain cleaner. We're doing our monthly cleanup, and we just want to make sure that we keep our fountain free from any obstructions or any stuff landing in it. So if you see petals or leaves or grass clippings falling into the fountain, scoop those out and get rid of those.
And is that the same for rain? If it rains, is rainwater okay?
Rainwater is actually great for your fountain. So most of our out of the faucet water that we're getting in our yards is probably going to be fairly hard. Most of the Twin Cities water has a lot of lime in it. It's really hard. It's got a lot of minerals in there. So you're probably going to get mineral deposits with your hose water if that's what you're using to fill up your fountain. Now, some people will actually catch rain in rain barrels. Some folks will actually use distilled water in their water features. If you've got a small water feature like that guy where maybe you're using 3 gallons, it's not too bad of a proposition to go to your local grocery store, get yourself a few jugs of distilled water and use that to fill up your fountain so you don't get any of those hard water rings in your fountain.
if you do use rain barrel water, isn't there some gunk that's as it comes off roofs and...
Right, so I mean, just like any other thing that you're filling your fountain with, sometimes you will at the bottom of a barrel, just like in the bottom of your fountain, you may get some of those deposits, the dirt and dust. That's going to be naturally in the air around us, right? So it comes out of the clouds, there's dirt in there and there's dust in there. So you can run it through a fine sieve, like a metal coffee filter, as you're pouring it into your fountain if you wish to use collected rainwater.
And we've kind of talked about this all day, but do you just want to go over the different types of DIY fountains?
Yeah, so we have a couple of the basic container DIY fountains that we have here. You can also do statuary DIY fountains where you would use a basin. Maybe you would pick something like that little concrete basin there, but then you would put a statue in the middle and have the statue be what we call a spitter, where it spits water out of the statue and then back into the basin. Now, in order to use statuary for your fountain, you need to make sure that at least a part of the statue is drilled. So there's actually a hole that has to go up the middle of the statue and then out whatever is pouring the water, right? Most of the Gertens statuary here is not drilled, but you can, if you're very careful, use a concrete bit to drill yourself, or you can buy pre-drilled statuary, or you can even use pond spitters to make yourself a bit of a DIY statuary fountain. The other kind that we have up at our pond lot, up on the north side, is you can buy big basins to do a dug-in, what we call pondless water feature. So you buy a big plastic basin, you dig it in and set it right at ground level. Then your pump is going to sit at the bottom of that basin. It's going to come up with your hose, and then you're going to probably have something like basalt columns, pre-drilled basalt rock columns that are going to sit on top of that basin, and they're going to have the water spill up through the column and then down into the pebbles and back into the basin. And then that is a larger kind of version of something like this, where you basically have the water sitting in the bottom and it comes up through the rock and then it bubbles back down again. So that is something that you can also get most of the materials for right here at Gertens.
Do you have any final points you want to talk about?
Pretty much if you guys have any questions, feel free to let us know. We do carry a small variety of water pumps, as well as our PondMaster Eco submersible pump and fountain head kit. So we do have some of the basic supplies here at Gertens, but not everything is available. Check your local hardware store. Make sure you have all of your materials gathered before you start your project, just to kind of keep those frustration levels low. And again, if you ever have any questions, feel free to talk to one of our pottery staff. All right, thanks so much for joining us today, you guys. I hope that all of you have a fantastic rest of your summer. We'll be joining you again in August to talk more about fun water feature, fountain, and pottery things. And for those of you who are going to the Aquatennial this weekend, have a fantastic time. Thank you so much for joining us, Gertens Gardeners, and have a wonderful day.